Section 1. Hey guys, tonight we're traveling far, really far, back to the dusty, golden streets of ancient Mesopotamia, where you, a rather underpaid but spiritually fulfilled baker's assistant, are about to have a very long, very bready day. The sun is just peeking over the walls of UR, turning mud brick rooftops into glowing amber blocks. There's a smell in the air, ash, yeast, and something that might be donkey. You stretch, yawn, and immediately regret that your bed was basically just straw and woven reeds. There's no coffee here, by the way. Sorry. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I love knowing who's drifting off with us from across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge out into the street with sand still in your sandals. The alleys are already buzzing, vendors shouting, children sprinting, someone loudly scolding a goat. You navigate past a shrine to Ninkasi, the goddess of beer and fermentation. She's technically your patron deity, though you've never felt she's terribly helpful before sunrise. Your bakery, if it can be called that, is little more than a clay-walled courtyard with 2 domed ovens, a few stone tables, and a barrel that's supposed to keep out rats but mostly houses them. Still, you're proud. It took your uncle years to save up the bricks for this lease. Bricks here are currency. No joke. You once watched a guy pay a dowry in baked mud tiles. Your job? Mix the dough. Keep the fire stoked. And most importantly, deliver the bread by foot or donkey cart before it goes stale in the 98-degree heat. And yes, it's already 98 degrees. As you throw open the wooden gate, the head baker, your uncle and possibly the sweatiest man in Sumer, hands you a list carved into a clay tablet. It's got symbols for different customers. A triangle for the temple priests, they want date-studded loaves again. A wavy line for the fishmonger's wife, she likes hers crisp. And a symbol that might be either military garrison or that one guy who always asks for extra salt. Historians still argue whether these bakery tablets were purely economic or also used as receipts and contracts. You don't care. You just hope you don't drop it. One time you shattered a delivery order and spent 6 hours reconstructing it like a tragic puzzle. The first oven's roaring already, fed with dry palm fronds and goat dung. Yes, really. The dough is half soured, sticky, and smells weirdly like cider. But you know the recipe by heart. Barley flour, water, and a starter culture passed down from someone's great-great-grandmother's best friend. You knead it by hand, no gloves, just elbow grease and trust. In the corner, a tiny clay figurine of Pazuzu, the demon of plagues, oddly popular in kitchens, keeps watch. Some say he blesses the dough. Others say he's just there to scare off rodents. Either way, you nod at him respectfully. The sun climbs higher, and so does the stack of flatbreads. Every 5 minutes, someone pokes their head in asking, "Is my order ready yet?" You think about inventing a sign that says, "Take a number," but you'd need another clay tablet for that, and those aren't cheap. By mid-morning, you're packing deliveries. The loaves are wrapped in palm leaves, labeled with little reed tags. You load them into woven baskets, strap them to the sides of your family's eternally unimpressed donkey, and brace yourself. You pass the scribe's house. He's teaching his son how to spell fig. The brewer's hut, already loud, and the bathhouse, where 3 older men are arguing about which god invented sourdough. You mentally place bets. Your money's on Enlil. You hand off the temple order to a bored teenager in a feathered headdress. He nods solemnly, hands you a token that represents payment pending, and wanders off to stare at a wall. Back at the bakery, your uncle's deep in conversation with a visiting grain merchant. The merchant is very serious about barley ratios and claims he can tell the difference between sun-dried and shade-dried grain by smell alone. You try not to roll your eyes. You finally grab a leftover loaf, still warm, and sit in the shade. It's dense, crusty, slightly sour, comfort food of the Bronze Age. Your fingertips are dusted in flour, and the smell of ash clings to your tunic. You lean back, half listening to the buzz of the city. A breeze stirs the air, warm but welcome. And for a moment, you think, maybe tomorrow won't be so bad. Unless the donkey refuses again. Then all bets are off. Section 2. The sun is a little higher now, and so are your stress levels. You're back at the bakery, sweaty, slightly sunburned, and holding a clay tablet that someone just handed you with far too much confidence. It's not even noon, and you've already deciphered 3 shopping orders, each one more confusing than the last. But this one's a masterpiece of ambiguity. You squint at the wedge-shaped inscriptions. The customer seems to want 5 loaves, easy. But then there's a symbol that looks like a fish stuck in a jar, followed by something that might be either urgent or beware of dogs. Honestly, cuneiform is an art, not a science. The scribe down the street tried to teach you to read last summer. You lasted 3 days. Too many rules, too many exceptions. And don't even get started on determinatives, those sneaky little symbols that don't get pronounced but change the meaning of everything. It's like someone made a language out of Sudoku. Still, clay tablets are the lifeblood of Babylonian grocery delivery. Forget ink and parchment. Ink smudges, parchment tears. But clay is forever. Unless you drop it, in which case it's a lawsuit waiting to happen. So here you are, turning over a fresh tablet in your hands like a confused librarian. The order is from an elite household, the one with the bright painted lion statues and the suspiciously quiet guard dogs. You've never actually seen the lady of the house, but her servant always delivers the orders with a kind of flourish that screams, "We have more food than you." Inside, your uncle is checking stock. He's humming a hymn to Enki, the god of water and mischief, an appropriate combo, given how often the bakery floods during rainy season. You ask if he understands the fish in a jar symbol. He nods, mutters something about a saltwater paste, and waves you toward the storeroom. You head there, ducking past hanging reed mats and baskets of crushed dates. You pass the barley barrel, the good kind, not the weird, sprouted batch that smells like regret, and reach the small jar labeled for Fish Lady. It's salty, fermented, and allegedly edible. You hope she still wants it. Last time, she claimed it was too enthusiastic. Back at the prep table, you shape the loaves. They're small, dense, and a bit pyramid-shaped, easy to carry, hard to eat unless you soak them in something. The Mesopotamians were practical like that. They didn't believe in fluff. Bread was fuel, not fluffernutter. You roll the dough, sprinkle on the herbs from a garden pot by the window, your cousin calls it culinary weeds, and press a signature seal into each loaf. Yes, seals. Every professional bakery worth its dung-fired oven uses them. Yours has a goose and 3 stars. No idea what it means, but it looks official. Historians still argue whether these seals serve as brand logos, quality guarantees, or simply decorative flexes. You assume it's all 3. The tablet has a note at the end, marked with a double triangle. This usually means deliver with haste, or the last guy was late and we're still mad about it. So you load up the basket, check the donkey's mood grumpy, and set off again. The city is louder now. Street performers play bone flutes near the temple. Merchants argue about copper weights. A man yells about discount cucumbers, which you're pretty sure is not a thing. You pass a woman selling beads, and a boy chasing what might be a hairless dog. The elite house is cool inside. Literally. Someone figured out how to redirect a canal stream beneath the walls, keeping it damp and breezy. You hand over the loaves and the salty paste to the servant, who sniffs and nods, as if this is somehow both acceptable and beneath her. You get a receipt tablet in return, scratched hastily, still damp. It's official, though. Proof that the bread was received, fresh, and not nibbled en route. You slide it into your pouch, alongside 3 other tiny clay tiles. Your pouch is now approximately 10 pounds heavier. You pause on the way home to watch a street performance. 2 men balancing baskets on their heads while reciting the Epic of Gilgamesh in sing-song rhyme. You only catch the part about Enkidu and the sacred forest, but it still makes your neck prickle with awe. You think about your own job. Mundane, repetitive, flower-filled. But maybe there's poetry in this, too. In decoding clay tablets, sealing loaves with ancestral marks, and walking them across the oldest city you've ever known. Back at the bakery, your uncle is already sketching the next day's delivery chart into soft clay. He waves you over, offers a lump of still warm bread with a smear of fig paste. You eat slowly. The dough is chewy, nutty, faintly smoky from the oven floor. You lean against the wall and breathe in the scent of roasted grain and wet clay. The sun has passed its peak. The donkey is snoring. And for now, there are no more symbols to decipher. Just warmth and the whisper of wind across the reed roof. Section 3. By now, your hands are dusted in flour so deeply that even your dreams probably smell like dough. It's mid-afternoon, which in UR means the heat is slowly shifting from punishing to mildly sarcastic. You step outside the bakery to stretch your legs and maybe your soul, only to hear the familiar clatter of your cousin arriving late with the daily beer ration. She's grinning, as always, and balancing a clay jug on her head like it's an accessory. You know she's really just here to sneak a free flatbread, but protocol demands she offer the beer as trade. Fair enough. You bring the jug inside. The beer is thick, sour, and more of a grain slurry than a modern brew. But it's beloved here, not just for hydration, but because it's safe. Water's fine sometimes, but beer won't give you parasites. The fermentation process kills off all sorts of microscopic gremlins, and the yeast does half your digestion for you. It's nutritious, cheap, and if you squint, kind of breakfasty. You dip a bit of bread into the brew, let it soak, and call it a meal. Around here, beer and bread aren't just dietary staples, they're religion. Literally. Ninkasi, the goddess of fermentation, has a hymn that's basically a brewing manual. You once heard a temple priest chant it like a recipe/prayer, complete with measurements and serving suggestions. You tried to write it down, but you got stuck on the part about smiling yeast. Still, it makes you wonder. You're not just a baker. You're an alchemist, a transformer of raw barley and dusty water into sustenance and ritual. You feed soldiers, scribes, temple workers, fishermen, even the fishmonger's overly demanding wife. You've got a role here. And the bread? It's more versatile than people give it credit for. Some loaves are fluffy and round, perfect for tearing. Others are hard as bricks, made to last days, or to be dipped in broth until they soften. Some are rolled around dates or onions. Some are baked with cheese or herbs. And then there's the seru, a dense, ring-shaped bread used for offerings, feasts, and sometimes awkward apologies. Then there are the building bricks. No, seriously. You step outside again, into the storage yard behind the bakery. Lined against the wall are hundreds, maybe thousands, of hardened barley cakes that were never eaten. Some are left out too long. Others were made for temple festivals that got rained out or politically canceled, don't ask. And a few were experiments gone terribly wrong. You once tried adding ground sesame. It came out like pottery. Rather than toss these stale loaves, your uncle stacked them like bricks. Mortar. Just wet flour paste. The wall's been standing for years. It's mildly terrifying. Bread, he once said, wiping his hands on his apron, feeds the belly, fills the temple, and builds the toilet shed. You're pretty sure that's not an ancient proverb, but it has a certain poetry. Some architects even argue that baked barley bricks helped form the earliest foundations of Babylonian outposts. Was it intentional? Historians still argue whether these bread walls were planned architecture or desperate recycling. Either way, they hold up surprisingly well in dry climates. You sit by the bread brick wall and watch a trio of children play with a toy cart made of sticks and turtle shells. One of them tries to tie a dried fig to the donkey's tail. The donkey disagrees. Your cousin plops down beside you, chewing idly on a crust. "Remember the time we tried to build a boat out of stale loaves?" she says. You groan. "We almost drowned in 2 feet of canal." She shrugs. "It floated." Briefly. You laugh, and for a moment, you forget the heat, the endless kneading, the deciphering of symbols that look suspiciously like someone sneezed on wet clay. Inside the bakery, the fire is down to embers. Your uncle naps on a reed mat. The room smells like smoked barley, ash, and memory. You poke through the day's leftover inventory. 3 onion loaves. 2 with figure 1 that looks like someone sat on it. You wrap them gently in palm leaves, label them "Feed Donkey," and leave them near the cart. There's something deeply comforting about this rhythm. The mixing, the shaping, the tiny clay seals pressed with care. The fact that your great-grandmother probably made the same type of loaf for the same type of official in a similar sunbaked street. Tomorrow the same. And the next day, until the river floods again or the barley goes weirdly sour. You run your fingers along the bakery's bread brick wall, nod once to the statue of Ninkasi perched near the oven, and whisper a small, flour-dusted prayer. May the dough rise. May the donkeys behave. And may the fish paste order never come back. Section 4. You wake from a nap you didn't mean to take, face down on a sack of grain, and with a smear of barley dough on your cheek. The heat is softened into something almost pleasant, and somewhere a reed flute is playing a tune that's equal parts lullaby and warning siren. You stretch, groaning as your spine crackles, and wander toward the front of the bakery, only to find chaos. 2 men are standing there, arms folded, both wearing identical aprons with a stamped lotus seal. You know that seal. It's from the bakery on Canal Street, the fancy one, the one with tiled floors, imported date syrup, and an absurdly attractive bread girl who never sweats. These men are clearly emissaries. Your uncle greets them with a wary nod and you immediately sense it, the tension. Not quite war, but something sticky and territorial. The neighborhood oven wars have begun again. See, in UR, communal ovens are public infrastructure, but privately managed. Your bakery owns one, barely, but 2 others exist in the district, and everyone's fighting over who gets to bake what, where, and how often. The ovens are hot property. Literally. They burn 18 hours a day, and whoever controls them controls the bread flow. Last month, the Canal Street Bakery accused your uncle of underbaking their flatbreads on purpose. Your uncle responded by demanding a full flour audit. Things got quiet for a while, too quiet. Now these 2 lotus-sealed gentlemen are back with what appears to be a formal complaint. They produce a tablet. Your uncle reads it, mutters, and then gestures for you to follow. Inside, in the darkest corner of the prep room, sits your family's secret weapon, the firebrick oven. It's smaller, older, and definitely not up to current health regulations, if those existed. But it holds heat like a sunstone, and it's fast. Too fast, some say. Which is the whole problem. Apparently, someone's been baking temple loaves after hours using this oven and not declaring them. Now, whether that someone was you is open to interpretation. Technically, you were baking. Technically, they were temple loaves. But it was your cousin's idea, and besides, there was a deadline. You help your uncle draft a reply tablet. He presses a counter-complaint into the clay, improper yeast fermentation, overuse of imported salt, and one batch that may or may not have had rat tracks on it. You don't mention the firebrick oven. Outside, neighborhood gossip swirls like dust in a sandstorm. The fishmonger's apprentice is telling anyone who'll listen that the Canal Bakery uses funny barley. One of the temple guards whispers that the bakers downriver tried to bribe a priest with a fruit loaf that was 80% pit. You start to wonder, is this normal? Historians still argue whether these bakery wars were truly competitive trade spats or more like symbolic rituals, a way for different guilds to assert pride, negotiate power, or just pass the time in a society where not much changed week to week. Regardless, you're now a foot soldier in the great oven standoff of UR. That afternoon, your cousin comes sprinting in, shouting that someone set up a rogue stall on the corner selling artisan barley rounds. The horror! Your uncle sends you with a warning loaf, extra crusty, barely salted, the culinary equivalent of a cease and desist. The man at the stall is surprisingly polite. He nods, accepts the loaf with a grin, and says he'll pass the message up the chain. You're not sure what chain, but you suspect it involves the dried fruit cartel over in Lagash. Back at the bakery, preparations begin for countermeasures. You're ordered to craft an apology gift to the priests, 8 soft loaves with fig glaze and press designs. You go all out. Floral stamps, zigzag crust, even a few embedded poppy seeds, illegally hoarded. Don't tell anyone. The loaves come out golden, steaming, fragrant. Too good, frankly. You regret not keeping one. The temple courier arrives late, riding a cart pulled by what can only be described as the angriest ox in southern Mesopotamia. He accepts the gift loaves without a word and hands you a tiny seal stone in return. It's carved with a lion eating bread. You're not sure if it's approval, threat, or just weird symbolism. You decide not to ask. Night falls with the oven still warm and the air thick with the scent of cooling crust. You sit by the door, rubbing flour from your arms, and watch the moon rise over UR's skyline, ziggurats glowing softly, rooftops still bustling with whispered arguments. A quiet night. For now. The oven war is still simmering, like dough that hasn't quite risen. But tomorrow might bring either peace or a scandal about flour weights. You close your eyes, lean back against the warm bricks, and let the scent of ash and figs lull you toward sleep until your cousin stomps in with the words no baker wants to hear. We're out of yeast. Section 5. The word yeast should never echo through a bakery like a curse, but tonight it does. You sit bolt upright, the warm evening suddenly feeling much colder. No yeast means no rise. No rise means no bread. No bread means no deliveries. And that, as every baker in UR knows, means complaints, possibly violent ones, from customers who paid in advance with good silver, or worse, with a goat. Your cousin, bless her cheerful chaos, is already halfway to the storeroom, lifting lids and sniffing jars as if the yeast might magically reappear if she looks hard enough. It doesn't. You join her, poking through crocks and jars labeled in faded ink. A few houseflies flee in protest. Their sourdough starter, barely alive, and some fermented fig mash that smells more like vinegar than hope. You give it a tentative stir. It gurgles back. We could, your cousin begins, borrow some. You both pause. There's an unspoken rule among the bakers of UR: never steal another starter. It's sacred, heirloom, almost familial. Each culture of yeast is passed down through generations, like names or grudges. But borrowing is a gray area. You think of the brewery 2 alleys over. They make a strong barley beer, and their fermentation jars are covered in a thick foam that looks promising. Historically, the line between baking and brewing yeast has been thin. Some scholars believe they were one and the same. Others argue yeast wasn't even understood as a living thing, just a blessing from the gods that settled mysteriously into dough on humid days. You decide not to mention this to your uncle. Better to ask forgiveness later, especially if the loaves turn out decent. So, under the cover of twilight, you and your cousin sneak toward the brewery. You carry a lidded jar, your cousin carries charm and plausible deniability. The brewery smells like heaven and old sandals, wet grain, burnt wood, faint smoke, and something oddly citrusy. You duck behind a vat and skim a little foam from the edge of the beer tub. The yeast is thick, bubbly alive. You whisper thanks to Ninkasi and Bolt. Back in the bakery, you stir the foam into a fresh mix of barley flour and warm water. You cover the jar with cloth, mark it with a small reed cross, and leave it by the oven's gentle heat. Now you wait. Morning comes early in Mesopotamia, and this one arrives with tension. You uncover the jar. It's bubbling, frothy, smells vaguely like success. You mix a test loaf. The dough is soft, pliable, more alive than any mix you've touched in days. You shape it into a flat spiral and slide it into the oven. As it bakes, it puffs up gently, not too much, not too little. You tear it open. Steam, air pockets, a mild tang. It's good. It's bakery-worthy. Your uncle takes one bite, raises an eyebrow, and says nothing. High praise. Deliveries resume. The first stop is the spice merchant who paid in advance with saffron threads. His wife accepts the bread with one hand and waves away the flies with the other. It smells different, she says. You smile and pretend not to hear. Next is the fishmonger's mother, who insists on inspecting the bottom of the loaf for omens. She sniffs it, nods solemnly, and slips you a small bronze ring. You don't ask why. The real test comes at the temple. The priests are notoriously picky. You hand over the loaves, slightly different in texture, a bit more fragrant, a touch darker crust. The priest takes a bite, closes his eyes, and mutters something about divine fermentation. You exhale. That night, you name the new starter hammer yeast. It feels clever at the time. Your cousin proposes bottling it. We'll be rich, she says. We'll call it UR Dough Rising. You throw a spoon at her. Still, you start feeding the jar daily. Flour, water, warmth, a whisper of song. It becomes a pet, a child, a slightly bubbly roommate. You begin to think in terms of yeast cycles. Some loaves you shape smaller now, some you braid. The dough responds differently. It has moods. Historians still debate how much Mesopotamian bakers understood the microbiology of yeast. But they definitely knew when a starter was happy and when it wasn't. Yours is thriving. By the end of the week, customers are commenting on the lift, the fluff, the mysterious glow of the crust. You shrug, say it's divine blessing, and accept their offerings: dates, oil, sometimes small birds, you give those to the temple cats. As night falls, you check on your jar one last time. It gurgles softly in the warm corner like a purring beast. Your cousin raises a toast with a half cup of beer. To the phone that saved us. You tap your clay cup to hers. To sneaky borrowing. To not telling uncle. You clink, drink, and fall asleep leaning against the bread brick wall, the yeast still alive, the loaf still warm. Section 6. Today begins, as many do when you are, with a priest at your gate holding a very long receipt and a very short temper. He's here for the temple loaves, the fancy ones. The ones made with honey, shaped into fish, or sometimes stamped with little divine faces. The ones that are definitely not ready yet. Your uncle handles the encounter like a pro, nodding gravely, apologizing for the oven spirit's unpredictability, and offering a free sample in the form of a half-burned onion roll. The priest accepts it without looking, and you swear he eats it before he's even left the street. You, meanwhile, are busy with the flour ledger. Yes, there is a flour ledger. It's a clay tablet etched daily with quantities delivered, used, owed, and misplaced. It's a bureaucratic masterpiece. Flour, here, is more than an ingredient. It's a currency, a debt, a measuring stick of loyalty and wealth. You once watched two merchants argue over a debt involving 7 measures of flour or 1 elderly goat, whichever comes first. Today's tally isn't promising. A few measures short, and not just because of the new yeast. You've had a string of flour favors lately, neighbors in need, relatives visiting, and that one guy who accidentally spilled his entire sack into the canal. Your uncle frowns. We'll need to collect, which means you're about to become a bread tax collector. The role sounds noble. It is not. You grab your tablet, your receipt pouch, and your cousin, who brings the intimidating glare, and head into the streets. First stop, the brewer. He's 3 measures behind and pretending not to notice. He offers beer instead. You counter with the fact that beer doesn't rise dough. He grumbles, hands over 2 sacks of slightly damp flour, and warns you not to check for weevils. Next, the weaver. She's surprisingly organized, hands over half a measure, and asks if you'll accept fabric as collateral. Your cousin accepts a small tunic, mostly because it's purple and shiny. You don't argue. Then, the fishmonger. The fishmonger. He owes 4 measures and insists he paid last week. You produce the receipt tablet. He squints at it like it's written in Martian. After a tense standoff involving a dead eel and a lot of gesturing, he agrees to deliver the flour tomorrow, definitely. You accept on one condition, 1 extra smoked fish for your trouble. You receive 2. Victory. By noon, your pouch is heavier with tokens, your back sore from sack hauling, and your mood somewhere between mildly triumphant and deeply dusty. But the oven must go on. Back at the bakery, the flour is sorted, inspected, and finally added to the main stock. You clean the measuring bowls, rounded clay cups with ridges on the side. Each ridge marks a volume. These aren't just tools, they're standardized, royal approved, used across the empire. Historians still argue whether these flour measures were enforced by royal decree or simply spread by trade. Either way, they're a miracle of consistency in a world where most things are measured with hands and hope. You mix dough with the new flour. It behaves differently, stickier, less fragrant. Your cousin suspects the brewer mixed in a little ash again. You sigh, adjust the water, and hope for the best. That afternoon, the temple sends another courier. This one is younger, cheerier, and clearly new. He hands you a new tablet. You read it and blink. It's a list of special requests. 1 loaf shaped like a bull, another with dates in the shape of a constellation, and a third that's just round. Like, aggressively round. You stare at your cousin. Is this a prank? She shrugs. Maybe the gods are into geometry now. You get to work. The bull loaf turns out okay. A little lopsided, but expressive. The constellation loaf is more like abstract art. And the round loaf, that one's perfect. So round, in fact, that your uncle declares it suspiciously spherical and insists it be baked twice. As they rise in the oven, you think again about the strange logic of flour. How it shapes the day. How a missing measure can start a feud, and a full one can secure a marriage proposal. Yes, it's happened. How it connects you to farmers, millers, merchants, and priests, all through a substance that clings to your skin and settles in your lungs. You cough, wipe your hands, and glance at your cousin. She's shaping leftover dough into little birds for the kids next door. Not practical, but charming. When the temple courier returns, you hand him the bowl, the stars, and the orb. He examines them, then gives a satisfied grunt. "These will please Enlil," he says. "Especially the bull," you reply. "Especially the round one," he adds. You never ask why. Evening comes with a breeze. You sit by the ledger, tallying up the day's intake. The math's not perfect, but the shelves are full, the orders are delivered, and the new yeast is thriving. You draw a smiley face in the corner of the clay. Tomorrow, you'll fight again for flour, for fair prices, for the right to be the best bakery on the street. But tonight you rest. The oven glows, the jars hum, and the flour ledger, your ancient, dusty accountant, is finally balanced. Section 7. The morning begins with a whisper. A very loud, urgent whisper from your cousin, who bursts into your room holding a tablet marked with the seal of the palace. Not the temple, not a local merchant, the actual palace. You sit up so fast you knock over a jar of dried onions. The donkey outside brays in sympathy, or possibly warning. You take the tablet and turn it over in your hands. It's heavy, not just in weight, but in implication. It bears the three-sheaf emblem of the royal kitchens, and the characters are carved deeper than usual, like the scribe wanted to make sure no one missed the message. Royal order. 10 loaves. By dusk. Inspection pending. You read it twice. 10 loaves. You've done bigger. Dusk deadline. Tight but doable. But inspection pending. That's the part that makes your stomach curdle. When the palace orders bread, it isn't just about taste. It's about loyalty, precision, texture, political signaling. One wrong crumb, and your bakery could be barred from elite contracts, or worse, accused of sacrilege against the stomach of the crown. Your uncle, upon reading the tablet, sighs like a man who's aged 10 years in 10 seconds. "We'll need the good flour." That means the lockjar. You retrieve it from under a pile of broken sieves and ceremonial aprons. It's marked with the family seal, goose and stars, remember? Inside is the fine, pale barley flour saved for emergencies, weddings, and divine flattery. You clean the prep table, light the firebrick oven, and begin the sacred process. First, the barley soak. You let it rest in warm water until it releases a faint, sweet aroma. Then the mixing, slow, steady, with exactly 16 turns clockwise and 10 counterclockwise. Why? No one knows. But your grandmother did it that way, and you're not about to tempt fate. Your cousin prepares the molds, rectangular wooden trays lined with leaves. 4 palace loaves. The sides must be sharp, the tops glossy, and the bottom scorched just enough to hold their shape without becoming bitter. You assign each loaf a flavor enhancement: honey glaze, crushed date, poppy seed swirl, and your personal gamble, rose water from a vendor who swears it's authentic. He also tried to sell you camel-proof sandals, so the jury's still out. The oven blazes, the dough rises, and you feel a strange calm set in. This is your zone. The shaping, the scoring, the brush of oil across the crust. You don't speak. Your cousin doesn't speak. Even the donkey outside stops making demands. The first batch comes out golden and fragrant. You set them to cool in the draft near the door, carefully guarded by a broom, your cousin, and a threatening note. An hour later, they arrive. The inspectors. 3 of them. One with a notebook, one with a spoon, and one with the expression of a man who's never liked anything, not even sunshine. They enter without greeting, sniff the air, and approach the cooling rack like it's a crime scene. Notebook inspector jots down everything: shape, weight, crust color, scent profile, number of ants within a 3-meter radius. Spoon inspector taps each loaf, then breaks one open and tastes it with a level of ceremony usually reserved for coronations. The third. He just stares at you. Finally, they confer in whispers. You can't hear them, but you catch phrases like acceptable density and better than Lagash's disaster. Encouraging. Then comes the verdict. Notebook inspector steps forward and, in a voice like dry parchment, says, "This bakery is certified for royal supplemental orders subject to seasonal review," which is Mesopotamian for, "You did okay, Don't mess it up next time. You don't cheer. But inside, your spleen does a tiny cartwheel. After they leave, you sit on a stool, suddenly aware of how badly your feet hurt. Your cousin flops down beside you, flour still on her nose. "We're royal now," she says. "Supplementally royal," you correct. "That's like half a crown." You both laugh, and then argue briefly about who gets to eat the leftover honey loaf. You win, but only because you hide it behind the statue of Pazuzu. That night, as the bakery winds down, your uncle quietly brings out a clay jug, aged fig wine, saved for special occasions. You all drink a little, even the donkey, just a sniff, don't worry. There's no music, no speeches. Just the low hum of a successful day and the warm silence that says, we did something right. Historians still debate whether common bakeries truly supplied royal households or if palace bread came solely from internal kitchens. But in this moment, in this corner of you are part of something grand. You feed the city, you feed the crown, and you do it with dough, patience, and a little bit of borrowed yeast. As the moon rises, you drift to sleep on a sack of grain, dreaming of poppy seeds and pyramids of rising loaves. Section 8. The next morning brings an unexpected visitor, tall, sun-scorched, and wrapped in a cloak embroidered with tiny wheat sheaves. He smells like road dust and ambition. He doesn't speak much at first, just hands you a tightly packed clay tablet, freshly etched and still warm from the scribe's press. You squint. It's from the palace granary. Inventory review. Your uncle mutters. They want to know what we've done with the flour subsidy. Ah, so it's that time again. Every so often, the palace sends out inspectors to make sure subsidized grain is being used appropriately, which means used to feed important people, not to trade for spices, snacks, or, as your cousin once did, a decorative cat figurine with glow-in-the-dark eyes. You roll out the flour tally scrolls, clay tablets lined up end to end on a bamboo tray like a domino snake. Each one is carved with receipts, deliveries, and notes like missing half sack due to wind-related accident. The inspector pulls out a stylus and begins cross-checking, squinting like someone who's never met joy. He's accompanied by a scribe in training, a nervous boy who keeps dropping his inkless pen and apologizing to a beetle. As they inspect, you mentally run through what you've actually used the palace grain for. The recent priestly orders, the big temple festival, a noble's birthday loaf shaped like a lion, and of course, your own daily deliveries, which, technically, include your aunt, who, technically, is not a government official. Historians still argue whether palace flour was strictly rationed or functioned more like a soft power currency. What's certain is that misuse could lead to fines, forced repayments, or in extreme cases, reassignment to latrine salt management, a role no baker wants to spell out. "Where is the offering loaf from the 12th of Simanu?" the inspector asks suddenly. You blink. That was over 3 weeks ago. Eaten, I assume. By whom? Hopefully the god it was for, your cousin mutters under her breath. You suppress a laugh and point to the line on the tablet, marked as handed to temple courier at dusk. His name was Tall Beard, smelled like garlic. The inspector stares. You stare back. He moves on. You watch as he measures a handful of barley from your stockpile using a polished shell scoop. He weighs it against a calibrated pebble. This, you realize, is not about accuracy. It's about theater. He wants to see you squirm. So you squirm a little, just enough to be polite. When they're done, he presses a small red seal onto a fresh clay tag. Inventory pending. Secondary inspection scheduled, which means nothing and everything. You'll be on their list now. After they leave, your uncle lets out a sigh, so long you think he might collapse. We'll have to increase temple donations, he mutters. You agree. Nothing appeases auditors like free loaves shaped like sacred fish. So that's your afternoon, baking flour tax offerings. You craft loaves shaped like doves, crescent moons, one vaguely resembling a turtle, and one that might be a chariot if you squint and tilt your head. Your cousin adds a sprinkle of sesame on one because presentation matters, even to celestial beings. You deliver the loaves to the temple in a basket lined with lotus petals. The priest thanks you by nodding once and handing you a fresh clay token with a stamp of Ishtar's lion. The rest of the day flows by in the hum of business. You knead, you fire, you deliver. You smile at familiar faces, dodge a flying chicken, and get bribed by a child with a pebble shaped like a heart. Evening approaches, and with it, a cooler wind. You sit outside with your cousin, sharing a loaf smeared with goat cheese and honey. Around you, the city murmurs, soft voices, the clatter of carts, distant singing. You think the inspector believed us? She asks. You shrug. Doesn't matter. We made the loaves. The gods got theirs. The math mostly adds up. And if it doesn't, you take a long sip of barley beer and grin. We baked them more loaves, maybe shaped like spreadsheets. She laughs, nearly spits her drink. And just like that, the tension breaks. Historians often debate whether Mesopotamian bakery records were about control or trust. But tonight, in your tiny courtyard beneath the wide sky, you realize they were about both and something more. They were stories carved into clay, meant to say, we were here, we made bread, we did our best. You fall asleep with the scent of flour on your fingers and the faint echo of the scribe's voice in your ears. Section 9. Morning comes with an awkward silence broken only by the distant wail of a goat that's either giving birth or auditioning for the temple choir. You rub your eyes and find your cousin already awake, chewing on yesterday's crust and staring at something on the bench. It's a message tablet. She nudges it toward you with her foot, chewing slowly like someone who's decided today might be a bad idea. You read it, then read it again. It's from the Office of Weights and Measures, and it says you've been accused, very formally, of bribing a grain inspector. Now, this would be absurd if it weren't so familiar. Your bakery, humble as it is, does receive the occasional grain check, usually from some scribe's nephew who got stuck with the least glamorous government internship. And yes, on one occasion, you might have handed him a sample loaf during an inspection. A loaf stuffed with dates, possibly wrapped in a ribbon. But a bribe? That's strong language. Your uncle is already pacing by the oven. He mutters about sabotage, jealous competitors, and that slippery snake from the River Street Bakery. Your cousin suggests drafting a counter-complaint involving their use of suspiciously light flour. You suggest breakfast first. While you chew on a regrettably dry muffin, a boy arrives with another tablet, this one an official summons. You're to report to the Bureau of Grain Oversight by sundown. Wear clean clothes. Bring records. Possibly bring a goat. The message implies, though that could be metaphorical. You spend the afternoon preparing, pulling ledgers, shaping apology loaves just in case, and brushing dust off your slightly less stained tunic. Your cousin insists on joining you, saying she knows how to glare convincingly. You don't argue. The bureau building looms over the market square, tall and stern, with carved bas-reliefs of scribes measuring sacks and looking deeply unimpressed. You're greeted by a clerk whose beard is too well-combed for your taste. He leads you into a chamber lined with stone benches and 3 officials seated behind a table that's mostly occupied by dried figs and passive-aggressive energy. The lead official speaks without looking up. State your business. You blink. I was summoned for alleged impropriety. He finally looks at you. Ah, the bread briber. Not a title you were hoping for. You're asked to explain the so-called gift. You describe the inspection, the loaf, the dates, the very standard decorative reed wrapping. You emphasize it was tradition, hospitality, cultural context. One of the officials mutters, always cultural context. Another flips through a clay ledger. Do you deny the inspector received a full round loaf with premium sweetener? You glance at your cousin. She shrugs. We deny nothing, you say, but assert our intent was ceremonial, not transactional. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian gifting customs crossed into bribery, or whether such exchanges were so routine that no one cared unless someone complained. In this case, someone definitely did. After an hour of deliberation, during which 2 of the officials argue about barley grading, the decision is rendered. No fine, no punishment, just a warning. Next time, the lead official says, offer plain bread, or less ribbon. You nod solemnly. Of course. As you leave, the clerk hands you a tablet marked Inspector Preferences for future reference. It lists acceptable gift forms. Plain loaf, fine. Honey loaf, risky. Anything stuffed, suspect. Your cousin steals it and laughs the whole way home. Back at the bakery, Your uncle is waiting with a bottle of diluted beer and a satisfied smirk. You didn't get reassigned to sewer duty, he says. Good day. You agree. But just in case, you start drafting a new house policy. No loaf over a quarter pound without written approval. That night, you craft a single, perfect round bread and place it beside the oven, shaped like a balance scale. No glaze, no garnish. Just dough and quiet intention. Maybe next week, you'll bribe someone again. But for now, you bake clean. Section 10. You begin the day with your hands in flour and your head somewhere else entirely, because last night you had a dream. Not about bread. Not about the donkey. No, last night you dreamed of a priest in robes made entirely of barley, whispering secrets into a jar of dough. You woke up strangely inspired, and also hungry. So naturally, when you spot the high priest of the local grain temple standing at your gate this morning with an entourage of acolytes, you're convinced the dream meant something. He nods at you solemnly. We require 16 ceremonial loaves, he says. Standard size, double crust, divine inscription. Also, he glances around. 1 loaf for consultation. You blink. Consultation. Yes, he says. I had a dream. The barley goddess spoke to me, said I should ask you. You nod, slowly, as if this happens every week. Of course. The priest presents a tiny clay token, marked with the sign of the grain oracle. That's right, your city has a bread oracle. Officially, she's a priestess. Unofficially, she's your aunt. And more unofficially, she's known for making pronouncements about weather patterns and fertility based on the shape and texture of baked goods. People take her seriously. She once predicted a 3-day windstorm from a loaf that deflated mid-ceremony. The priest wants a consultation loaf, which means you're now baking bread for prophecy. You get to work. You mix the dough slowly, with added salt and a dash of sesame. You sing the ancient bread chant under your breath. You know the tune, if not the exact words. You let the dough rest not once, but twice. You shape it into a round, press the center with your thumb, and then, just before baking, add a single poppy seed. Why? Because your aunt insists prophecy requires flair. The loaf comes out warm, golden, cracked slightly across the top in what she calls a divinatory bloom. You place it on a reed mat and send it, along with the other 16 ceremonial loaves, off to the temple with a courier who once lost an entire batch in a canal. You wish him luck. Later that day, your aunt shows up. She's barefoot, beaming, and holding the loaf aloft like a trophy. It spoke, she says. You nod. Of course it did. She sets the loaf down and pulls out a wax tablet, scrawled with scribbles and flour smudges. There's a message, she says. A soft crust means mild winds. A hollow bottom means fertility. And this crack here. She traces a line across the crust. It's a sign. Someone in UR is hoarding barley. Your cousin gasps. A scandal. You raise an eyebrow. Do you know who? The bread was vague. Later, your aunt declares the oracle loaf a Class 4 vision bread, places it on the shrine beside the dough effigy of Tammuz, and blesses your oven with a handful of spelt. By now, word has spread. You have visitors all afternoon. Mothers asking for loaves to soothe colicky babies, merchants requesting fortune buns to guide business decisions, and one young man who nervously requests a romance roll. You do your best. You bake quietly, gently, whispering hopes into the dough, shaping small charms into the crust, scoring patterns meant to evoke good harvests and safe travels. Your cousin starts labeling each one with silly names. Lucky crust, the flake whisperer, yeast of fate. By dusk, the bakery feels less like a shop and more like a shrine. The fire is low, the air smells like sweet barley, and people are lined up outside not just for food but for meaning. Historians still debate whether so-called bread divination was genuine belief or gentle theater, a way to soothe the heart through carbs. You suspect it's both. You sit beside the oven, tired but oddly content. You didn't plan to become a baker oracle. But bread has a way of expanding, softly, slowly, and sometimes beyond the boundaries of its original pan. You pull out one last loaf, shaped like a spiral, with a surprise fig tucked in the center. You place it by the door for any wandering spirit or late-night priest who might need a little insight and a little warmth. Because here in UR, sometimes the gods speak, and sometimes they just want a snack. Section 11. Mid-morning sunlight filters into the bakery, warm and syrupy, as your cousin barges in with news. My friend's opening a barley pop-up. You blink. A pop-up. She nods, animated. Just 1 week. Specialty loaves. No bricks. No bureaucracy. Just art. You rub your temples. It turns out her friend, Kinu, a well-meaning, half-trained baker poet with a fondness for loud tunics, is launching an experimental bread stand. The idea: barley reinvented. He's not licensed. He doesn't own an oven. He might be using yours. I said you'd help. Your cousin adds cheerily. You groan. Does he even have a flour source? Oh, he's using millet, she says. You stare at her. Millet. And you are. That afternoon, Kinu arrives. He's carrying a basket full of strange shapes. Cone loaves, spirals, flatbread with painted herbs. He smells like enthusiasm and a little too much incense. I'm baking for beauty, he says. I want people to feel something when they chew. Your uncle listens for exactly 12 seconds before storming off to polish his official baker's seal, muttering about standards and what happens when children don't fear bricks. Kinu sets up on a corner near the fish market, borrowing your oven space under the agreement that he pays in grain, or, failing that, poetry. His menu is written on a piece of dried palm frond and includes items like the mood loaf, crescent of longing, crunch of regret, experimental flatbread, no questions. On the first day, people are skeptical. On the second day, they're curious. By the third, there's a line. Your cousin helps manage orders while you supervise the oven use, which mostly involves making sure Kinu doesn't burn anything too important or accidentally mix spices meant for ceremonial funerals. You try one of his loaves. It's weird, chewy, surprisingly floral, but not bad. Not bad at all. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian baking allowed for innovation or strictly followed traditional forms. You now have proof that at least one person tried to revolutionize the crust. But Kinu's fame comes with consequences. The Temple Bakers Guild hears about the pop-up. They arrive 2 days later with official tablets, stamped warnings, and long speeches about trade integrity and zoning rights. Apparently, all baked goods sold within 100 cubits of the temple must be sanctioned, and this part is real, rounded at the edges. Kinu protests. Edges are part of my expression. Your cousin hisses. Just round them. You step in and suggest a compromise. He can serve as experimental loaves as samples, offered free with a suggested donation for flour conservation. The guild agrees, barely, and stomps away muttering about millennial nonsense. That evening, you find Kinu scribbling new ideas into clay. I want to make a loaf shaped like a question, he says. You nod slowly. Maybe just start with a question mark. That night, you bake side by side. You stick to temple orders, practical rounds, and crusty reliability. He bakes swirls and smiles, shaping dough like dreams. You don't quite understand it, but you respect it. And when a noble scribe stops by and buys 2 mood loaves with actual silver, you start to wonder if maybe, just maybe, you are as ready for a little weirdness. After the weekends, Kinu cleans his space, thanks your oven with a burned offering, a literal burnt loaf wrapped in reeds, and moves on to another quarter. You find a thank you note etched on a leftover plate. To the baker who knew when not to laugh. You smile, tuck it away, and return to your regular loaves. But you keep one thing. A tiny spiral stamp he left behind, the one he used for his emotional buns. You don't use it on orders. But sometimes, late at night, you press it into the last loaf of the day. Just in case someone needs a surprise. Section 12. The week begins with an ominous breeze, and your uncle frowning at a bowl of water. Feel that, he mutters. Dry wind. Bad for the crops. Worse for the muffins. You raise an eyebrow. We don't make muffins. We were going to start, he replies darkly. It doesn't take long to confirm his worry. The farmers downriver report trouble, poor canal flow, unexpected salt buildup, and most damning of all, a beetle infestation. The barley harvest is officially not great, and bad barley means bad flour. The first batch arrives that afternoon, dusty, pale, and faintly sour even before water touches it. You sift through it with a heavy heart. The flour clumps. The smell is off. You test a small dough. It rises oddly, collapses mid-oven, and comes out flat and emotionally disappointing. By evening, your shelves are full of rejects, lumpy flatbreads, misshapen buns, and one loaf so dense your cousin uses it to hammer a nail. "Can we fix it?" she asks. You don't answer. Because the truth is, maybe. Or maybe not. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamians understood the long-term effects of poor irrigation on their crops. But your nose tells you everything you need to know. The grain this season is stressed, the soil too salty. The muffins, if they ever existed, are doomed. You try your best. You mix with cooler water. You need longer. You add extra oil. But the loaves still feel unhappy. Customers notice. Not enough to riot, but enough to frown thoughtfully and mutter about last week's bread having more spirit. That evening, a merchant arrives from further upriver. He's heard of your bakery. Even the palace rats eat your crusts, and offers a deal: better flour, smaller sacks, higher price. Your uncle glares at him. "We'll manage." The merchant shrugs and leaves. But the thought lingers. You remember the old loaves, golden, proud, light enough to tear. You glance at today's batch. They're edible, but barely. Maybe we could ask the temple for a grain blessing. Your cousin offers. You scoff. I don't think the gods care about our crust. But later that night, you find yourself quietly placing a small offering loaf on the shrine, just in case. The next day, the flour's worse. You decide to test something radical, grinding your own. You borrow a small hand mill from the brewer, who, to your surprise, uses it to crush flavor additives like coriander and despair. You set to work, turning raw barley into flour by sheer will and arm strength. It takes hours. It makes your elbows ache. But the flour, coarse, uneven, unbleached, smells alive. You bake with it. The loaf that comes out is ugly, cracked, rustic. But you tear it open and something inside sings. Steam, warmth, a yeasty tang. You pass a piece to your cousin. She takes a bite, chews slowly, and says, "This is what bread is supposed to taste like." You nod, already plotting. You send word to your aunt, who knows a farmer who hasn't irrigated from the main canal in years. You speak to a neighbor who claims to know, a secret barley dealer. He doesn't, but he has opinions. You consider, briefly, asking Kinu. Eventually, you find a source. It's not much, just a few sacks, but enough to supplement the bad batch. You mix carefully. You blend old and new. And you start shaping loaves with deeper ridges to make up for the flatter rise. It's not perfect, but it works. You call them storm loaves. They sell well. Historians have little record of what bakers did during grain shortages, but you imagine it looked a lot like this. Trial, error, flour in your eyelashes, and stubborn hope. By the end of the week, your storage room is cleaner, your flour more selective, and your arms disturbingly toned from all that hand grinding. Your cousin starts drawing storm clouds on each invoice. And you sit by the oven, cradling a lumpy, fragrant, slightly cracked loaf, and for the first time in days you smile. Because sometimes the crust splits, sometimes the barley fails, but if you listen closely, the dough still rises. Section 13. The storm loaves are holding strong. Your arms now have the muscle tone of a minor deity, and your cousin has become the unofficial brand ambassador for ugly but trustworthy bread. So naturally, just when things stabilize, the river moves your bakery. Not metaphorically. The river actually moves. You wake to the sound of shouting. Not unusual, but this is more panic than usual. You rush outside and find half the alley flooded ankle deep in water, frogs, and what may be a temple scribe's sandal. The Tigris has overflowed its banks, again, but this time it's not just flooding. It's rerouting. Somewhere upstream, a minor canal collapsed. Water now flows directly into the east quarter, carving a new course between the bathhouse and the brewer's hut. And your bakery? It's now technically located on an island. Convenient for fish delivery. Your cousin quips, staring at the rising water. Less convenient for bread delivery, as it turns out. Your regular customers can't cross the water. The donkey refuses to wade. You attempt to rig a raft out of bread brick rejects and a reed mat. It floats, briefly, then becomes a snack for an opportunistic goose. The temple courier arrives by canoe. You hand off the loaves like a smug gondolier. He leaves with 2 flatbreads, a blessing, and damp ankles. That night, you consider your options. Relocate? Impractical. Build a bridge? Ambitious. Learn to bake underwater? Probably illegal. Instead, you adapt. You create the dock loaf. Flat, water-resistant, wrapped in waterproof waxed palm leaves, stamped with a sunburst seal. Customers collect them by pole or paddle. Children turn bread pickups into river games. One even races a floating loaf down the side canal, placing bets with neighbors. Historians still debate whether Mesopotamian cities had formal infrastructure to deal with canal shifts. Most evidence suggests they didn't. They just endured, innovated, and occasionally lost a temple to an ambitious current. You begin building walkways, temporary platforms from scrap wood and old flour crates. Not elegant, but passable. Your cousin dubs it the floating bakery experience and suggests charging for the view. A visiting noble, intrigued by the novelty, arrives on a raft wearing embroidered sandals and insists on tasting the famous flood loaf. You offer him a warm crescent baked over a damp fire. He declares it earthy and tips you with a fish token. It's possibly cursed. You hang it by the door. One night, the river rises again. You wake to sloshing and find the oven half submerged. Disaster? Nearly. You and your cousin work fast, building a raised platform using brick loaves in panic. The fire just barely survives. The bread that day has a distinct smoky wet aroma you call Tigress Vintage. It sells out. Your uncle eventually returns from a grain-buying trip, stares at the watery chaos, and mutters, "I leave for 4 days." You offer him a flood loaf. He chews it, nods once. Could use more salt. Things settle, sort of. The river seems content with its new path. The frogs move on. The bread raft becomes a shrine to ingenuity, adorned with small tokens from loyal customers. Someone leaves a tiny clay boat. Someone else offers a scroll of praise, shaped like a fish. You realize you've become more than a baker. You're a bridge builder, a dough fairy, a crust-based crisis manager. And that, in this old city of gods and water, is no small feat. As the moon rises over your soggy street, you sit on a wooden platform, feet dangling above the current, hands dusted with flour, heart oddly full. You bake through floods now. You bake on islands. And still, the loaves rise. Section 14. If baking is an art, then Babylon has just invited you to a secret gallery. It begins with a knock, 3 short raps at the bakery gate, followed by a silence filled with the distant sound of date sellers arguing about whose fruit is plumper. You open the door and find a man dressed in what might be ceremonial baker's robes, or just an elaborate apron. He holds a tablet sealed with wax, stamped with a design you've never seen. A circle of crusty lines surrounded by barley stalks. He says only 3 words. You've been noticed. And just like that, you've been invited to the Guild of Crusty Gentlemen. Your cousin snorts milk through her nose when you tell her. Your uncle turns oddly reverent. "I thought they were a myth," he whispers. The Guild, as legend goes, is a semi-secret society of elite bakers who gather monthly to trade techniques, protect sacred recipes, and rumor has it, vote on who gets the honorary title of dough whisperer. Membership isn't bought. It's earned. And your flood loaves, your dock deliveries, your consultation crusts, apparently, they caught attention. You follow the messenger through winding alleys and across damp wooden walkways until you reach an unmarked door. Behind it, a cool chamber lit by oil lamps shaped like kneading bowls. A long table of bakers, young, old, flour-dusted, sits in silence. They motion for you to sit. In front of you, a round loaf uncut, still warm. "Evaluate it," one says. You stare at the loaf. The crust is perfectly split, the base evenly browned, the smell faintly herbal. You lift it, turn it, tap its base. Hollow, promising. You tear it gently, open crumb, soft texture, even heat pockets. You taste it. It's flawless. You nod carefully. A 5-stage rise. Likely rested twice, then flash steamed. Black sesame, maybe. The Guildmaster grins. "Welcome." And just like that, you're in. The rest of the night is a blur of technique talk and guarded flour gossip. You learn about fire pacing, the rhythm of oven loading to maintain even ambient heat, crust scoring traditions. Some bakers mark with stars, others with family glyphs. Secret ingredients: tamarind paste, smoked date seed ash, saffron oil extracted from palace kitchens. You don't get everything. Some secrets are only revealed after 3 consecutive successful loaves, judged by the guild's loaf elders. Others are told only in whispers behind the grain bins. But you do get one gift, a stamp. It's a small, round seal carved from polished clay. The symbol: a crescent of flour surrounding a loaf flanked by tiny flames. You're told to use it sparingly, only on loaves you're truly proud of. Back at your bakery, you try it out on a test batch, a simple barley wheat hybrid, brushed with fig glaze and sprinkled with toasted seeds. The mark leaves a faint circle on the bottom of the crust, almost invisible unless you tilt it just so. But it's there, and it means something. Your cousin insists on naming you Flour Brother. You counter with Crumb Cousin. The donkey, unimpressed, eats an entire batch of misshaped rolls in protest. The next week, orders come in steadily, but you notice something new. Certain customers ask for the marked loaf. Others leave tokens of thanks, a bracelet, a reed charm, a poem about bread and longing. You don't advertise the guild, but somehow word spreads. Historians still debate whether elite bakers formed formal guilds or if this lore was added later by romantic scribes. But your flour-covered fingers, your marked stamp, and your uncle's proud silence tell you the guild is real. And now so are you. You fall asleep that night with the seal clutched in your palm, the smell of crust in the air, and the quiet satisfaction of a baker who has joined the loaf elite. Section 15. You wake to a strange smell, not unpleasant, just mysterious. Earthy, yeasty, slightly burnt. You follow it to the prep table, where your cousin stands holding a ruined loaf and staring at it like it just confessed something terrible. It predicted doom, she says. You blink. The bread, she nods. It split down the center, like a crack in the sky, and the steam rose in a spiral. It whispered. You approach carefully. The loaf does indeed look strange. The crust has formed an uneven fissure, almost like a lightning bolt. The base is overbrowned, and the texture, when you tear a piece, resembles a sun-scorched scroll. I think the oven spirit is angry, she adds, deadly serious. You consider several replies, discard them all, and instead mutter, maybe it was the old flour? But she's already preparing a purification mix. Dried mint, salt, a bit of goat hair, and an incense cone she stole from the temple's lost-and-found box. She sprinkles the mixture around the oven, then taps the bricks with a wooden spoon while chanting a song in a made-up language. You let her do this, because, frankly, the loaf does feel weird. And because this isn't the first time your oven's acted strange. Months ago, during an eclipse, all the bread came out with small holes in the shape of eyes. Once, during a drought, the loaves wouldn't rise unless baked before sunrise. And during the river incident, a batch of flood loaves spontaneously formed spirals, none of which were in the original shaping. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamians believed ovens could be haunted or simply treated them with superstitious respect. You lean toward both, especially now. To be safe, you bake a peace offering, a round, unsalted loaf, stamped with the guild seal and dusted with a little ash. You leave it by the oven with a clay token that says, "No hard feelings." That night, the dreams return. You're in the bakery, but it's floating down the river, surrounded by loaves with glowing eyes. One of them speaks in your aunt's voice and says, "Don't forget the poppy seeds." You wake up sweating. The next morning, your fire won't catch. Not unusual, unless it happens 3 times in a row. Your uncle checks the wood. Dry. You check the air vents. Clear. You check the donkey. Grumpy, but unrelated. Your cousin declares it official. The oven's cursed. She suggests a ritual cleansing. You suggest a strong cup of beer. A compromise is reached. You clear the space, remove the old ashes, and line the oven with fresh reeds. You light a fire using wood from the fig tree struck by lightning last year, because why not? And recite the ancient baking oath. Loaf rise, crust hold, dough obey, gods be kind. You add a few extra please, S for good measure. The next loaf? Perfect. Golden. Rounded. Sweet steam. No cracks. No eyes, no messages from the beyond. You tear it in half, breathe in the scent, and feel something shift. Relief, gratitude, possibly hunger. Later that day, a traveling priest stops by for a consultation loaf. You shape it carefully, round, balanced, glazed with honey and pepper for vision enhancement. He holds it, closes his eyes, and smiles. There's clarity in this crust, he says. You don't ask what that means. You just nod wisely and accept his offering, a carved token with a flame-shaped mark. Your cousin hangs it near the oven. As evening falls, the air smells clean again. Smoke, flour, and something peaceful. The donkey sleeps. The fire hums. The loaves rise. You sit by the oven, watching embers glow, and wonder what secrets live inside the heat, what dreams dough holds, what messages crusts carry. And for once, you're not afraid, because even when the oven murmurs, it's still home. Section 16. You knew something was wrong when 3 officials showed up without asking for bread. They're dressed in identical tunics, each carrying a stylus, and wearing the expression of someone who's about to audit you and enjoy it. One of them gestures to the clay bench. "We're here for the census," she says. You blink. "Of people." "No," says the second. "Of loaves." You stare at your cousin. She shrugs. "It's the loaf census," she whispers. "They do it every 5 years. For planning. Or magic. No one's sure. Turns out it's very real. Every bakery in UR must provide an exact count of all baked products produced, sold, donated, lost, or spiritually gifted within the past 30 days. The inspectors will observe your baking, check your clay tablets, and, if needed, sample your product. Extensively, one of them pulls out a tablet the size of your torso and starts listing categories. Flatbread round, flatbread oblong, temple loaves standard, temple loaves shaped, bread used in trade, bread used in marriage proposals, bread lost to animals, bread sacrificed to celestial entities. You cough. "Do you want an average?" "No," says the lead inspector. "We want exact numbers." You sigh and pull out your delivery tokens. What follows is a day of measuring, counting, and describing bread with more precision than you thought possible. You explain why you classify the fig swirl loaf as ceremonial even though it occasionally becomes breakfast. You clarify that the disaster muffins were never sold but might have been eaten by accident. One inspector questions your tally of festival rolls. You explain that during the last moon feast, your cousin made extra for aesthetic purposes. The inspector nods solemnly. Aesthetic loaves are acceptable if not misleading. The donkey contributes nothing. By mid-afternoon, your oven is working at half speed just to keep up with demand. The inspectors want to witness your process under real conditions. You oblige. You demonstrate a batch of river edge flatbreads, a small set of temple coins, crusty bites shaped like tokens, and one particularly dramatic star-shaped offering loaf. The lead inspector bites into one and pauses. "This tastes accurate," she says. You're unsure whether that's good. Your uncle, meanwhile, is in the back scribbling updated inventory on emergency tablets. Your cousin has appointed herself bread liaison, explaining every loaf with unnecessary detail and comparing each one to famous city officials. She names one roll the governor's nose. It's not well received. You try to focus. You knead, shape, and bake while the officials observe, scratch notes, and occasionally debate the spiritual significance of crust thickness. One of them measures a cooling loaf with a bit of string. Another licks a fingerprint off a glazed bun. Historians still puzzle over the level of bureaucracy in Babylonian food systems. But judging by today, the answer is obsessive. At dusk, they compile their findings. One inspector breaks a ceremonial wax seal and stamps your tablet with the final judgment. Total loaves for the period, 782. Categorized. Acceptable variance. They nod. You're within your threshold. No fine. Next audit in 5 years. You breathe. They leave behind a copy of the census report, rolled and tied with a reed cord. You place it on the shelf beside your most prized recipe tablet. It's official. Your bread has been counted, classified, and governmentally recognized. That night, you celebrate with a loaf you didn't have to explain to anyone, just hot, fresh, and smeared with mashed dates and a sprinkle of salt. You eat it on the roof, under the stars, while your cousin hums a song called Loaf Audit Blues. You don't mind the counting, because even if no one ever thanks you for it, someone, somewhere now knows that your bread exists. And that, somehow, is enough. Section 17. The heat is already thick by mid-morning, the kind that makes even the dough sweat. You're brushing oil across a tray of temple loaves when your cousin bursts in with a look on her face that says, "Bad news, but possibly entertaining. They're holding a bake-off," she announces. "And you're in it." You blink. "I'm what?" "The temple. They want to see who can bake the best loaf for the goddess Ashnan. You versus the temple chef. You drop your oil brush. The one with the personal oven slaves and the imported cinnamon. She nods solemnly. That's the one. The contest, it turns out, is part of a harvest festival. A small, humble affair with only 24 judges, 5 official scribes, and a prize basket that includes saffron, silver, and a clay trophy shaped like a barley stalk. No pressure. Your uncle immediately declares this a distraction. Your cousin immediately begins sharpening her fig-cutting knife. You just stare at the baking table, wondering if divine favor can be baked at 400 degrees. You start testing recipes. Your opponent, the temple chef, has the advantage of reputation, resources, and a disturbingly sharp apron. You have stubbornness and a secret weapon, your storm loaf technique. You refine it, adding a touch of honey, using your guild seal sparingly, and scoring the crust with a wheat motif your aunt says pleases the crop spirits. The day arrives. The judges include 3 priests, a tax collector, a noblewoman who thinks cumin is spicy, and 1 child chosen by lottery who keeps sneaking raisins. The temple courtyard is packed. The donkey is dressed in ceremonial flowers. Someone's playing a lyre. You set up beside the temple chef, who nods at you politely and immediately begins layering his dough with rose water, date syrup, and smugness. You stick to your plan: clean ingredients, deliberate hands, and loaves that rise on their own terms. You bake in silence. Your cousin shoos away a chicken. Your uncle watches from a distance, pretending not to care. Your loaves come out golden, slightly cracked, with a sheen of hope. You place them on a reed tray, sprinkle with toasted grain, and step back. The tasting begins. The temple chef's loaf is airy, sweet, elegant. The noblewoman swoons. 1 priest calls it transcendent. The child makes a face and says it tastes like flowers and lies. Then they try yours. The crust crunches audibly. The steam rises slowly. The priest murmurs a blessing. The tax collector takes a second bite. The child grins. "Tastes like real bread," he says. Your cousin beams. The judges confer. A scribe tallies votes using a wax tablet and a stick. It takes longer than expected. There's an argument about mouthfeel. At last, the lead judge steps forward. "We award the prize to the flood loaf." You stare, then realize that's your loaf's nickname. You've won. Your cousin lets out a whoop. Your uncle nods once and mutters, "Humph. About time." You're given the saffron, the silver, and the clay trophy, which is heavier than it looks. The temple chef shakes your hand with dignity, though you swear you hear him mutter, "Next year, cumin." That night, you host a small feast. You slice the winning loaf into perfect pieces, share it with neighbors, and even offer a piece to the donkey, who promptly eats it whole. Historians might never know the exact winner of this obscure bake-off. No tablet records it. No bard sings about it. But you remember. You, the baker of Uar, who stood in the sun, shaped hope from flour, and beat a temple chef with nothing but your hands, your hearth, and a crust that crunched like victory. Section 18. The morning after your bake-off victory is unusually quiet. Not peaceful, suspiciously quiet. You peek out the bakery door and spot your donkey tied to a street post. That's odd. The donkey never goes anywhere voluntarily. You follow the clues: an empty oat sack, hoof prints in the flour, and your cousin's tunic crumpled on the floor. You step outside, just in time to hear shouting from down the street. You run. There, at the edge of the market square, is the donkey. And on the donkey, your cousin, covered in flour, holding a delivery basket with one hand and the donkey's reins in the other, both spinning in wild circles like a badly rehearsed parade. She yells, He struck. I retaliated. The donkey brays. Loudly. You step into the fray. Apparently, the donkey refused to move that morning unless bribed with dates. Your cousin, in a moment of heroic irrationality, mounted the beast herself and attempted to complete the bread deliveries manually. The problem, the donkey has opinions. Strong ones. By the time you calm the situation, the bread is slightly shaken but intact. Your cousin is uninjured, if dramatically rumpled. The donkey, triumphant, accepts a fig as reparations. You escort them back, taking over deliveries for the day on foot. But the incident sparks something bigger. You start noticing signs of donkey rebellion. He won't carry more than 4 loaves without protest. He stops in front of sweet stalls until he's fed. He once accidentally kicked a sack of flour and then walked away like nothing happened. The other animals take notice. The brewer's mule starts demanding footbaths. The fishmonger's goat refuses to wear decorative ribbons. The neighborhood chickens have begun roosting in your delivery cart with impunity. It becomes clear your donkey has unionized. You try reasoning, bribes, negotiation, even a small loaf with raisins hidden inside. Nothing works. Then your cousin proposes a radical solution. We bake him a donkey loaf. What now? A tribute. A loaf made just for him, acknowledging his labor, appealing to his ego. It sounds absurd, so you do it. You shape a round, dense, date-filled bread. You carve his name into the crust, loosely interpreted. There's no standard donkey script. You brush it with oil, bake it low and slow, and present it with the solemnity of a palace offering. He sniffs. He snorts. He eats the entire thing in 3 bites. And the next day, he delivers. No fuss. From then on, the donkey gets 1 special loaf a week, union bread. Your cousin calls it. He seems content with this arrangement. The deliveries resume their pace. The chickens disband. The goat continues to be difficult, but that's just his personality. Historians rarely discuss the role of pack animals in Mesopotamian bakery systems, but clearly, they were more than tools. They were collaborators, co-workers, and, sometimes, deeply petty participants in daily life. You carve a tiny donkey shape onto your next delivery basket, a mark of respect. That night, you watch him doze by the cart, belly full, harness askew, dreams likely shaped like figs and soft crust. You smile, because here, in this dusty city of gods and flour, even donkeys demand dignity. And the best you can do is give it to them, 1 loaf at a time. Section 19. The wind smells like barley and change. You wake to the clatter of hooves, the rattle of clay jars, and the unmistakable clang of someone dropping an entire pot of date syrup. Your cousin shouts from the courtyard, inventory day. You groan. Twice a year, your bakery does a full stock assessment. Every seed, every jar, every damp scoop of flour must be counted, weighed, judged, and if applicable, fed to the donkey. It's not glamorous. It's not pleasant, but it's tradition. You start with the basics. Barley, 6 sacks, 1 slightly gnawed. Lentils. Why do you have lentils? Dried onions, still potent, and your beloved mystery spice pouch, which you agree to label as aromatic blend until someone figures it out. But midway through the count, something goes wrong. You open the bottom storeroom and find water. Not a flood this time, just dampness, condensation, spoiled grain. You pull open 1 sack, and the smell hits you like a cart full of fish left in the sun. Mold, the kind that crawls and creeps and ruins everything it touches. You've lost a full sack, maybe more. Your cousin starts checking everything. You fan the door to let out the stench. Your uncle mutters curses from the old language, the kind you're not supposed to say near the temple. This is bad. You start calculating. Lost grain means fewer loaves. Fewer loaves means smaller orders. And smaller orders mean lost trust, especially from the temple, who recently ordered 3 dozen star-shaped offerings with fig glaze and divine sprinkles. You can't afford that. But then your cousin, ever the optimist, says, "Let's do it ourselves." Do what? Get the grain. Now, grain collecting is usually handled by professional merchants with carts, guards, contracts, and camels. You have none of those, but you do have a donkey, a borrowed crate, and an uncle who once dated a grain keeper's niece. So you set off. The grain fields lie just beyond the city edge, flat stretches of gold under a pale blue sky, dotted with workers in wide straw hats. You arrive at the nearest outpost and present your guild seal, a delivery token, and your best responsible baker face. The keeper sighs, weighs your pouch of silver flakes, and finally nods. You load up fresh barley, cool, dry, heavy with promise. Your cousin talks to every farmer she passes. You test grain by biting it. Why is that a thing? You gather enough to cover your losses and to stockpile for emergencies. You return triumphantly just before dusk, grain secured, donkey pleased, pride intact. And you immediately set to work baking. That night's batch is one of your best. Simple loaves, round and clean, no glaze, no gimmicks. Just honest flour, warm air, and steady hands. You leave a few extra loaves out on the ledge for neighbors. You even deliver one to the grumpy scribe who once accused you of overglazing. He eats it, says nothing, leaves a polished stone in return. You take that as praise. Historians often overlook the logistics of ancient bakeries, how easily they tipped from abundance to scarcity. But you understand it deeply now. You felt the weight of the mold, the sting of uncertainty, but you also found your way through it. By doing the work, by showing up, and by trusting that one ruined sack doesn't mean the oven goes cold. Not today. Not in your bakery. Section 20. The sun is sinking over you are, painting everything in warm tones. Mud brick rooftops, the golden dome of the grain temple, the faded awning over your bakery's courtyard. You've just finished stacking the day's final loaves on the cooling shelf when your uncle walks in, arms crossed, expression unusually neutral. You brace for bad news. Instead, he says, "Close the gate. No deliveries tonight." You blink. Is something wrong? "No," he says. "We're done." You stare, unsure if he means done as in finished, retired, or, given recent events, possibly struck by divine vision. Then he pulls a dusty reed basket from behind the kneading table. Inside, an old family seal, 3 jars of ceremonial honey, a chunk of aged fig resin, and 1 clay plaque etched with the bakery's original oath. "We're making the end-of-market loaf," he says. Your cousin gasps. "I thought that was a myth." Everything around here is a myth until someone remembers it. Your uncle says, and you get to work. The end-of-market loaf is a beast of a bake, dense but sweet, symbolic but still edible. It's only made once every few years, when the city has survived. Bad barley, floods, taxes, raids, mold, politics, and even the occasional bureaucrat with too many opinions about crust thickness. You begin the process. First, you burn a pinch of dried grain over the fire and whisper a thank you. Not to any specific god, just to the rhythm that keeps the oven lit. You mix barley and wheat, old flour and new, fig mash, date syrup, and a suspiciously crunchy herb your cousin insists tastes like memory. You shape the dough into a spiral, then into a knot, then back to a round, because no one actually remembers the traditional shape. You carve the family sealed deep into the crust. And into the oven it goes. Slow bake, soft fire, no rush. As it bakes, you all clean. You sweep the ashes, scrub the bowls, refill the water jugs. You restack the bricks that keep cracking. Your cousin hums an old lullaby. The donkey sleeps. The city fades to blue. When the loaf is ready, you don't slice it. You place it on the table and pour 3 cups of diluted fig wine. You sit. You breathe. You remember. You remember the clay tablets you almost dropped. The bread brick wall. The bake-off. The donkey strike. The guild. The consultations. The flood. You remember your first flatbread. You remember your hands learning what warm dough feels like on a cold morning. Your uncle raises his cup. "To the oven." "To the loaf," says your cousin. "To the stubborn rise," you add. You drink. You eat. And it is good. The loaf is soft, sweet, nostalgic. It tastes like years of trying, like smoke and memory, like something more than food. And when it's done, you don't feel full. You feel ready. The night deepens. The oven dims. The wind picks up across the roof. You lie down beside the warm bricks, eyes half closed, breath full of barley and ash and fig. Because you've fed a city, you've honored your family, you've heard the oven whisper. And now, you rest. Wind down 300 words. The fire has faded now. The last embers crackle quietly, barely glowing, as soft night settles over the rooftops of UR. The bakery is quiet, only the occasional rustle of reed mats, the distant drip of water from a nearby jug, the gentle sigh of flour shifting in its jar. You stretch out along the still warm floor, cool air brushing your cheeks. Around you, the scent of baked grain lingers, sweet, earthy, familiar. It's the kind of smell that holds stories. Not big ones, just small, slow moments that stack like loaves on a shelf. Steady, reassuring. You hear your cousin moving somewhere near the donkey, murmuring softly, then the sound of her settling into sleep. The donkey shifts once, satisfied. Even your uncle has stopped pacing. In the quiet, your thoughts drift through clay tablets, through fig-scented steam, through the endless rhythm of knead and fire, of mixing and waiting, of doing the same thing again and again, not because it's expected, but because it matters. You've walked miles with warm bread balanced in a basket. You've watched clouds reflected in puddles beside the oven. You've shaped dough with your hands while wondering if the gods, too, might enjoy a snack. And now there is nothing left to do. Only the hum of silence, the whisper of grain, the memory of warmth against your back. Sleep comes like a soft crust, gentle, fragrant, wrapping itself around you. And you let it.